Welcome everyone to this real-world evidence for decisions webinar. I can see people coming into the meeting room, so I'm just going to wait a few seconds as people transfer in. So my welcome again. We know we have an international multi-stakeholder audience for this webinar, which is the second in our public series from the Real World Evidence for Decisions initiative. And we've been exploring health data initiatives that are happening in member states to understand how they might be useful to HTA and payers to inform their pricing and reimbursement decision making. And my name is Karen Facey. I'm a facilitator and I'm a consultant to the policy organization FIPRA that provides the secretariat to this initiative. So real-world evidence for decisions is a payer-inspired, multi-stakeholder learning network. It's meant to be pragmatic and agile, and its aim is to understand how real-world evidence might be used to inform HTA payer decisions about highly innovative technologies. We've been excited to see a wide range of really innovative technologies coming through to the health system. But for HTA and payers, this often comes with a challenge because they've often been through expedited regulatory approvals, which provide us with immature clinical evidence. So although these technologies are often said to have high benefit or even potentially be curative, we often don't have the evidence to prove that. So we've been considering whether robust real-world evidence could fill some of the gaps, either that we see in clinical development, or whether we as payers could be using real-world evidence post our initial decision to inform a later reimbursement renegotiation. And we don't do this via one member state. We think about how requirements could be aligned across stakeholders, particularly perhaps with regulators and clinicians, and across member states. And one of the fundamental things we consider in this initiative is that all stakeholders have their part to play in developing robust real-world evidence. And this must be done in a spirit of collaboration and with transparent processes. And because we believe that all stakeholders are important, we have established a steering group, and our next slide shows the steering group that has been in place since 2022, really headed by Yoda Koch, prior CEO of the National Institute for Health and Disability Insurance in Belgium, and now their senior advisor. And alongside him, we have Dr. Deanne Kleinemans, president of the Commission of Drugs Reimbursement at INAMI, and she is my co-moderator today. You'll be hearing from her later. We then have a range of individuals who you will know in the HTA field from the EU and from Canada, from Laurie Lambert there in Cadiz. Also colleagues like Carlos Martin Sabarido from the Spanish Ministry of Health. And if you were at our May webinar, you will have seen him present about the Spanish system then. We also have Simone Boselli from Eurordis, patient input being very important to what we do. Other insurers such as Hans-Georg Eichler also bringing his past regulatory experience. Matti Apro, who's past chair of ECHO, the European Cancer Collaboration, academics like Entella Zoxi. And this initiative, the Secretariat in particular, is funded by a group of pharmaceutical companies led by the European Confederation of Pharmaceutical Entrepreneurs, EUCOPE. And if we go on to our next slide, I want to reflect on how we work together. We try to take a learning by doing approach. This is very much Yoda Koch's way of working. He's been thinking about how real-world evidence could be used practically by payers for the past 5 or 6 years, and really been pulling together multi-stakeholder meetings to discuss issues. That is, to share experiences, to understand challenges, but also to pool resources to develop solutions. It's a real kind of IT sandbox approach that takes real problems, case studies that have been in the past and products that are in development, and tries to develop light touch solutions. And through these dialogues, we can build trust and understanding of issues and learn from one another. And through learning, we like to produce public outputs. And if you go to our website, you can see reports of our past work. And importantly, we look to have policy engagement. We know there are lots of important initiatives at the moment in relation to the HTA regulation, but also internationally. CADATH is very involved in a number of initiatives related to real-world evidence. We engage with payers in different collaborations, but also we're interested in the real-world data space, as it were, and the developments in terms of the European health data space and what Darwin EU is doing. So we're interested in decision-making, we're interested in real-world data and how we bring those two together to really ensure that we optimize use of these highly innovative technologies. So if we go on to the next slide, we come to today's webinar, which is about national health data initiatives with a focus on Germany. We have Dr. Antje Behring, who is head of the pharmaceutical department at the GBA in Germany, and she's also chair of the Committee for Scientific Consistency and Quality for Joint Scientific Consultation in the UNETA 21 project. She will give a keynote presentation. Then in our multi-stakeholder way of working, we will have 3 reflections. Firstly, from Dr. Martin Danner, who's Managing Director of the Federal Association of Self-Help Organizations in Germany. Dr. Barthold Deiters, who's Head of Pharmaceuticals at the Society for Efficiency and Quality in Health Service Insurance Companies in Germany, and Dr. Alexander Nutz, who's Secretary General of UCOPE. They will each give 3 short reflections. And then if we go on to the next slide, we'll see how you can get involved. We want you to use the Q&A function. You can up-like other people's questions. And we will then take your questions, maybe through the reflection session, but we have about a 30-minute slot whereby we'll take your questions to discuss with our panelists. So without further ado, let's turn to the German situation and let's understand what's happening. And I welcome Antje to share her slides and to give her presentation.
Thank you, Karen. I somehow cannot open my camera anymore. It was working until a few seconds ago. I don't know what to change, but I will change my presentation. I think this is more important to see myself.
Okay, thank you, Antje.
Oh, and I just got a message. Wonderful. So
it's always the problem with technology that it works when you practice, but not when you do it for real. That's
sure.
good, Antje.
I should have practiced. Do you see anything now?
Yes, we see your second slide and it's now in presentation mode. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So because I don't see you anymore, so I need some sort of oral signals if anything goes wrong. So otherwise I will talk through and I will take you 20 minutes through the German system, how we will try up to now, we're still trying to do so, incorporate real-world evidence in our decision makings. Yes, I'm working for the GBA. The GBA is the highest decision-making body in Germany and who decides on the additional benefit on pharmaceuticals. Just one example of the different tasks of the GBA. I will run you through the agenda very quickly and now, wonderful. If I will start with a very basic introduction to introduce you to the reimbursement system of pharmaceuticals in Germany, because this is important to know in the background why sometimes Germany thinks like this sometimes, or why we do certain procedures on that. And all the rest is around the real-world evidence and generation, and of course the requests of the GBA to ask pharmaceutical companies to generate evidence in their routine practice. Okay, start with the first topic. The reimbursement of medicinal products in Germany is quite different from all other member states, I would say. All prescription medicines that come onto the German market are reimbursed. They are reimbursed immediately, and this market entry is made actually quite easy because the companies have to list their products on a so-called, I would say, sales list, and this is not very bureaucratic. But this is called, then if this is listed in this list, the product is on the German market. At that time point, most medicines have to submit a dossier to the GBA to undergo then the early benefit assessment. The early benefit assessment is since 2011 established in Germany, and well, up to now, almost no major changes in the procedure. Based on the resolution of the GBA during this benefit assessment, there starts a price negotiation between the manufacturer and the National Association of Statutory Health Insurance Funds with the manufacturer on the basis of the GBA resolutions. This price, which is negotiated then, is valid for all indications of this drug until the next indication comes for an assessment. Then the new negotiation starts. Up to now, there's still 1 year of free pricing. Every company can set their price as they think they can. And after this year, the negotiated price then has to be applied. For this year, an AMNOG reform bill is planned, which changes most probably the pricing regulations in Germany. But this is planned, I think, will come into force even this year. Because of this reimbursement system, the availability of medicinal products in Germany is very high. Almost all licensed products are available in Germany, very quickly accessible for patients. The time until the product is on the market is very quick. Now I will just touch upon the data sources and types of evidence which is normally used for early benefit assessments. I will skip the first 2 bullet points because I think this is for everyone clear that RCTs are preferred. Also, non-randomized controlled studies are acceptable depending on the context. But up to now, single-arm trials did not generate an additional benefit up to now, a proper additional benefit. They are not accepted, except for orphan drugs, of course, because for orphan drugs, the GBA has to take into account the approval studies. And products with a single-arm trial are most likely candidates for a data request of the GBA, an additional data request later on. Registry data that have been submitted up to now without any request, because there were companies who tried to get some evidence out of registry data. Registry data have not been able to demonstrate in sufficient quality to be used for a benefit assessment. The reasons why they did not lead to an additional benefit was mostly because missing data. For instance, confounder were discussed as very important for the effect size of this treatment. And despite this confirmed relevance of these confounders, data were missing, or if they were even recorded, they were not included in the comparison later on. Data were incomplete, as I just said. For instance, there were only safety data or only efficacy endpoints taken out of these registries. And for the benefit assessment, we always need both sides, safety and efficacy endpoints, to make a decision. There were, of course, missing patient characteristics, which did not allow the GBA to put the patients to the right patient population. And insufficient methodology were also reasons why it could not be accepted, because, for instance, naive comparisons were taken there to show an additional benefit. However, registry data were able to show, let's say, a benefit for epidemiological data. Electronic health records is, I would say, a painful topic in Germany, because up to now, these electronic health records were not sufficiently elaborated to use them for decision-making and for additional benefit. Main reason is there are mostly incomplete data sets, especially with regard to therapeutic interventions, durations of therapeutic interventions, outcomes are missing, especially safety outcomes, so that it's very difficult to take any information for the early benefit assessment out of these data. There is no lifelong identification number in Germany, so if patients change their health insurance company, they can't be traced. And sometimes these kind of data are also biased because of billing reasons. However, there are efforts made to encourage, or let's say to force this central data collection also in Germany. For instance, there is the Research Data Center was funded to gather all kinds of medical billing data of all people with statutory health insurance in Germany. And these data are collected and they should be accessible later on for people who apply to have access to these data. Up to now, this center is still under development and no applications can be made yet. There's a big effort for federal cancer registries. This law came into force in April 2013, firstly for the purpose to detect early cancer developments and to make some quality assurance through clinical cancer registries. The federal states are responsible for the organizations, and the development is different depending on the federal capacities of the federal state who's responsible for their registry. But there's a center for cancer registry data that compiles all data of different states, and of course epidemiological data and clinical data, checks these data for completeness and plausibility so that nationwide figures are available for new cancer cases. However, also here data are missing and these data cannot be used for proof and additional benefit and for decision making in Germany. Since the GBA can't wait until all these kind of central data collection is ready, they use these measures to request from pharmaceutical companies routine practice data collection. I will use the abbreviation ABD in the following slides because it makes it much easier for me to speak this way. The GBA can request an ABD for drugs who have a conditional or an exceptional marketing authorization and for orphan drugs. ATMPs are not explicitly mentioned in this law, but ATMPs fall mostly under the categories mentioned above. The GBA has to give specifications of the research question to the company. For instance, what kind of patient population has to be investigated? The type of evidence generation and the duration of the data collection must be defined by the GBA. Interestingly, with this data collection, the GBA can also restrict the permission for prescription of these drugs, namely to those clinicians who participate in this required data collection. This is unique because normally there is the freedom of choice for patients to select their own doctor. But here, only those doctors can prescribe this kind of medicine when they participate in this data collection. This helps, of course, to get the most complete data set as possible. If this data collection fails, there is a possibility that the price is negotiated and the price must be lower than the original price. It's called here, if non-quantifiable additional benefit, that means only for orphan drugs because we can't say anything else, then there is an additional benefit by law. This request or this ABD is following a specific procedure. And the first step is the assessment of necessity. That means the selection of the candidates who get a request for an ABD. Having decided what kind of candidates the GBA requests an ABD, the IQWiC is commissioned to draft an ABD concept. This concept then is subject for a written and oral hearing and with experts. It's not a public consultation. These are only selected experts. The registry owners are there, and the HTD, or the health technology developer, who are having same drugs and the same indications, for instance, and of course, the health technology developer who is responsible for this drug. These kinds of comments will then be discussed within the GBA, and we change then the original concept of the IQWiC, what kind of requirements has to be adjusted, what else can be requested, and leads to a resolution on the decision on the implementation. So the real work for the company starts after this step. They have to design a protocol, they have to write analysis plans and so on. And this is then discussed again within the GBA until then, in the end, the ABD can start. After the start of the ABD, there's a monitoring steps in between. Every 18 months, we can carry out a review. And if the data collection is terminated, then of course, we end up in a new resolution and a new assessment of the additional benefit in the end. What are the criteria for the products who are in the end selected? Of course, conditional and ATMPs, these are most likely to be selected in the end. Also, if conditions are imposed by regulatory authorities to collect further data. So we look at these products especially more careful if there's anything we can take out of these requests. And of course, available registries in indications and ongoing registry studies are also candidates to be most likely selected. Especially the GBA looks for candidates where we don't have any evidence for populations that is covered by the marketing authorization, but not covered by any available or planned studies. Or there's no evidence for a specific patient population. For instance, specific mutations or specific age group. Severity of disease is not covered or enough investigated. The most important criteria is, however, if there is no comparative evidence available or the comparative evidence is not covering the adequate therapeutic alternatives that are available, then this is I would say, the prerequisite to request for an ABD in the end. Outcomes are missing, patient-relevant outcomes, or at the time of the first assessment, it's only surrogate endpoints are available, or the study duration was too short to estimate the long-term effects or any safety issues. So that means the assessment of necessity covers two different types of strains. That means the assessment of existing evidence, is there a lack or a gap of evidence, and can this evidence gap be covered by a data collection? Sometimes also the GBA comes to the conclusion there's no possibility to fill this gap. For instance, if the patient number or the recruitment of the patient would take too long to get an evidence in an appropriate time. Up to now, there are not many candidates now discussed, and I have to admit we don't have any experience yet of a finalized data collection. I will just start from the last products. The last two products for hemophilia A or B. Here we are waiting for the IQWiC concept to discuss it further. For fedratinib, we had already an oral hearing, and now we are discussing within the GBA what kind of requests or requirements the GBA can ask from the company. So that we are only in that stage. The other two in the beginning, Risdiplam and Brexucabtagene autoleucel. I apologize for my pronunciation of these selected products. Here we had already a decision on implementation, and now we are waiting of the company. We are waiting for the company to come with the statistical analysis plan and a protocol design to be discussed within the GBA. And for Zolgensma, the very first one, we are already on the way to check the first interims report or the first status report, what the company has started and stated in the study protocol. Just to give a small overview about the cornerstones that the GBA requested from the company to investigate patients with SMA, and they had defined 3 different groups: symptomatic, pre-symptomatic patients, and so on, and different types of SMA and different age groups. This is the population the company has to investigate. The comparator would be nusinersen, and the outcome, motor functions and respiratory functions, and several safety outcomes. However, normally the GBA has a strong focus on quality of life, but in the discussion with the registry owners and also the companies and experts, they said this is very difficult to measure in this indication, and also to document and record these kinds of things. So therefore, you will not find any data on quality of life here. The primary registry or the primary source of data would be the registry called SmartCare. However, also, this was a recommendation of the GBA. Other sources have to be involved. For instance, the Restore register. It has to be recruited 500 patients, and the duration of this data collection is 60 months. So very long time to allow the company to recruit all these patients. And there should be a combination of historical data and prospective data. That means this is a very late price negotiation in the end. And up to then, we have to wait for further evidence. However, this kind of protocol and exercise is very helpful for all other products who come in the same indication, because we can follow somehow the same protocol. You can find everything on the webpage of the GBA. I just have here the link on the slide. So now I come already to my last slides. So what did we learn? We learned that we have to make an education and higher transparency of the processes to allow also companies and stakeholders to learn what kind of requirements has the GBA for the data collection. Because the process has to become more efficient, we need to adjust rules of procedure to avoid the prolongation until the time of the start of the ABD, because of various adjustment loops in the meantime. We would like to start the ABD much earlier, but it's really this has to be a routine use data collection. So the product has to be on the market that the GBA can require this kinds of data collection from companies. But we can prepare before the product comes onto the market, so that we can start right at the beginning when it comes to the market. We have to admit that the landscape we screened for registries in Germany, but also in Europe, is not suitable now for the requests and requirements of the GBA. So sometimes we have the feeling it would be much easier to set up an RCT and much lower workload for people who are involved in this. The same issue as the EMA has, the GBA cannot ask from the registry owner any changes. So this is always the role of the health technology developer, and the communication is a gap in this triangle, I would say. So sometimes it's really difficult, although this is a huge advantage in this expert exchange, which is implemented in these processes. Registry owners are on the table to explain what they can do and not, so they can listen what is required from the company, what do they need to do, and we had a very good experience recently with these kinds of registry owners. Sometimes also the company is unfamiliar with the registry studies, and we feel that there's a different mindset of having registry studies available. It's not just an extract of the database. It's really thinking like planning an RCT, what kind of endpoints we need. It needs a pre-planning, and not somehow post-hoc analysis of all these data. This needs more effort than a lot of companies thought at the beginning. That also helps then to have an early engagement with all participants, GBA and also regulatory authority, to educate the companies. So that means also that the planning and the statistical analysis plan and the study protocol is too late sometimes to make it ready in a sufficient time. One thing I would like to focus here also is make it transparent. That means the study protocols and all the information and advices should be possible to publish. And up to now, there's a huge discussion, what can be published, what can not be published. The GBA aims for highest possible transparency because there is so much to learn from each other that we would like that everyone gives the consent that even the preparation can be published. We are not ready with the data because this, in the end, is a dossier and will be anyway published. But also the beginning, we think there should be publishable. Just once more to say, if the GBA does not request an ABD, does not mean that we accept the weak evidence. It's just that we felt it's not possible or not feasible to ask for this evidence in routine data because there is no comparison possible. This is the only drug which is licensed in this way, and there will be no patients recruited for a comparative group. For instance, or the number of patients is too limited that we can take any robust data out of this. So what is the conclusion? We think that the ABD is only the last line of evidence requests, but if no other evidence can be expected, what could be helpful or could be generated still, then an ABD would be a good candidate to generate this evidence. We need this evidence to find a decision in the end where this product is in the therapeutic line and what is the value of this product also in the long term. It will be only supplementary evidence, supplementary to the clinical data we already have and having assessed in the first original assessment. And we think that more coordination is needed between regulatory authority. And last but not least, an ABD must be useful, knowledge enhancement for patient and physicians. It must be therefore publicly available. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy later on if you ask questions. Am I not? I think I gave it free.
Thank you very much, Antje. This was a very clear presentation. I know it raised some question in the audience, but we will come to this question later. I will first perhaps ask the reaction of our panelists, and perhaps I will start with Dr. Martin Danner to ask him how patients are involved in the process, and also his first reaction on that presentation. Martin, the word is with you. We listen.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to point out again that for the patients, the main focus of the benefit assessment in Germany is not the question of having access to innovative drugs or not. As Antje Behring mentioned, patients in general already have access to all licensed drugs. So the focus of the benefit assessment is above all the pricing for the new drug compared to the traditionally used drugs. And so the endpoints which are discussed in the assessments and which are collected later, they have to be patient relevant. And this is why the role of the patients' organizations in the assessment is that important, because this makes the difference which benefit patients really have. And therefore, the patients' organizations, they are involved, of course, in the discussion of the relevance of the endpoints. but they are also involved in the discussion of the study designs and the significance of the study results. And in general, the decisions of the Federal Joint Committee concerning the additional benefits of drugs, they are made in consensus. So the votings of the patients' organizations in general are important. They have not yet the right to decide, like the other stakeholders at the Federal Joint Committee, but the votings are already very important to have a decision in consensus. And if there's not enough evidence, as Antje Behring mentioned, there is the possibility to have the applicated related data collection. And also these discussions are meant by the patients' organizations. And as it was already mentioned, the data set which is collected in the application-related data collections has to be data which are patient relevant. So there again, it is important to have the patient's voice in the discussions about the collection of data. And as it already was mentioned, for us, the quality of life would be a very important endpoint because this is very patient relevant endpoint. And it is very hard to collect this kind of data in a registry-based data collection. So this is an important question for the future, how we can involve data of the improvement of quality of life in this application-related data collection of the Federal Joint Committee. But I'd like to summarize that the role of patients' organizations is very active and very autonomous because they are involved from the early consultations until the decisions of the Federal Joint Committee concerning the clinical trials, to the decisions concerning the application-related data collections. So it is a rather complete involvement. And of course, we hope that in the future, if we will have a European benefit assessment, the patients' organizations will play a similar and active role in this assessment too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very clear answer. I will now give the word to Dr. Barthold Dieter in asking how are SIGNET spent using real-world data to optimize the use of medicine.
Yeah, first of all, it's important for me to point out that I have nothing to do with HTA. No? That is Antje Behring's job. I am just a pharmacist at a payer organization, and in this role we have two perspectives regarding real-world data. The first is we implemented an anonymized data pool 2 years ago. Today it's called Smart Health Data Lab, and in this this data pool, we uses it in collaboration with scientific institutes and have a lot of questions of indications and drugs with high budget impact, of course, and ask, okay, how the drugs are working, how the interventions are working in the real world. If we have long enough the data, if we can if you can really assess if the intervention is working, yes or no, and afterwards we publish it. So we have 3, 4, 5 recent publications. If you use searching for my name, you will find it. So for instance, looking at type 2 diabetes and the impact, health economic impact for SGLT2 inhibitors versus DPP4 versus GLP1 inhibitors, agonists, sorry, and or what are patient-relevant endpoints like 3-point MACE regarding usage of NOACs or low-dose NOACs versus existing standard of care. These things are relevant from a payer perspective. And if we get results, we publish it, and we try, of course, writing, I don't know, around 150,000 letters a year to physicians, to give this information to them, to say, okay, from our perspective, maybe this or that intervention could make sense. Please have a look at if it makes sense from your perspective too. So a very soft steering just to give the information to the physician. And as Antje Behring says in the HTA, in our German HTA, real-world data plays not a role. That's true. And of course, it's normally not possible at the time point at the HTA to use, even if it would be taken into account, because they are not there after 6 months or so. So that's the first challenge. Maybe after 2-3 years, if you have a reassessment or so, but it's still not used, as she points out. But don't underestimate the usage of real-world data in the German system. So I'm involved in price negotiations sometimes. And yeah, for us, of course, there is a discussion, or questions could be that also the GBA looks at what is sorry, my son starting cutting the lawn. Sometimes the question is, what is a real comparator? What is the usage of real comparators in the German system? And that could be something you can answer with real world data, of course, always from Germany. The German context is relevant here. Or in price negotiations, the discussion is often what are the real costs of the comparators, what is here the right comparator, and with which therapeutic line, which comparator is used, etc., etc. Also, so I guess it's clear that regarding HTA, it's not relevant, but there's, with a little fantasy, there is a room, there is a chance for using real world data even in the German system.
Thank you.
From my side.
What is evident is that the position of real-world data collection and real-world evidence is quite different in the German system than it is in other European countries, in other countries in general, in the sense that, as you say, you have from the very beginning, as soon as the marketing authorization is granted, patients have access to the drug. And because of that, the position of real-world evidence is quite different than from other countries. And the objective, I guess, and from what I understand from the presentation from Dr. Behring, is quite different in Germany than it is in the other European country. And we have to take that into account. But nevertheless, there are some common ground between it. Now, I will perhaps, we will perhaps listen to the reaction of Dr. Natz and have the industry perspective. So I would like to hear your view on the German system comparing to what is happening in the other member state in Europe. So Alexander, I give you the word.
Thank you very much, Diane. It's a pleasure to be here to talk a little bit about the industry perspective about the German system of real-world evidence. You made a very important point that the German system is different from many other countries in Europe, that we have access from day one in innovative treatments. I think that's a very important point, which has to be highlighted when we talk about Germany. I think also Bartolt made a very relevant point. We are discussing here mainly about the ABDs, which is a system which is quite new since 2019. But also there are other uses of real-world evidence where the company can bring forward this type of data. For example, in price negotiations in the AMNAP context. I think that's a very relevant point which was made clearly. Reflecting on the ABDs from the industry perspective, I must say that when we have seen that new tool, which is basically putting GBA in the position of the main driver of those type of data requests, and it's a tool which needs to be seen in the context of AMNOG as an HTA system in Germany. We haven't seen so much of a criticism from industry, I must say. And also, when I look back the last, 2.5, 3 years now, there is not a loud criticism about the process, because we in industry think, or we understand that sometimes there are no direct comparisons. And when there are no direct comparisons, we do understand a certain discomfort of the system, or HTA institutions like GBA, or also some payers, which actually want to see at some point in time direct comparisons. And the tool to have these direct comparisons in the past was very often to limit the period of the GBA report to a certain number of years, to shorten the duration, to tell the company you need to come back in 2 or 3 years' time with more data. But at the end of the day, I think, and this is what I would like to start my intervention with, I think we have to see it as a positive thing, that rather than saying no to a medicine, rather than saying there is no additional benefit, that there is more time to be allowed for industry to bring certain data to the table, to allow for the more time for the generation of real-world evidence data, including direct comparisons very often. And I think that is generally to be seen very positive. I mentioned already that this system is very much a system where the GBA, in my opinion at least, is a main driver. The GBA sets out the question, and Antje Behring made very clear that it's important to really ask a question. I remember events GBA had organized. It needs to be a clearly defined question, which then needs to be answered under the PICO scheme in a way. And this already shows you that this is an exercise which is quite a bit driven by methodology, and that is something I would like to put on the positive side of that system. It has a very strong and robust methodology, which on the other hand means that it can be quite burdensome. We haven't seen too many of those procedures, and it's burdensome for all parties involved, and probably also for the assessors, for GBA and so on. So that's a bit the negative downside to that strong and robust methodology. When I would like to take a look from the industry perspective, of course, we would want to see such tools to be set out in a way that various needs are somewhat integrated. So, for example, we discussed in the beginning of the ABD system, the EBMT CAR T-cell and stem cell transplantation international registry. So that is in a way maybe a blueprint for an international registry, but we also talked about at that time about smart care registry, which has also been mentioned in Antje's slide on SMA, where there was no direct comparison. So there are different ways to do that. We also understand in industry that this is not easy. It's not always easy to be done, to integrate the needs of the regulators and integrate the needs of, let's say, French payer, a German payer, a Spanish HTA system, because they all operate in their own system. And this ABD registry is operated in the AMNOG system, and it identifies certain data gaps. And these data gaps need to be closed at a certain point in time. So we have to see things in their respective context, and that is not always making it easy to have a one-stop shop approach for a registry design. However, we would want to make that clear recommendation wherever there is opportunity to talk before registries are set up in Europe in general, that the decision makers talk to each other. I think here and there, some questions might be harmonized or aligned or coordinated, whatever you want to call it, in the interest of making sure that patient access is going to be made easier, and not that we are putting too many registry requests on the shoulders of the companies. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to harmonize and coordinate at the HTA level. We all know that on the 12th of January 2025, the EU HTA system is coming into force, and there is at least the attempt to have one PICO scheme. Maybe we will end up with more than one PICO scheme, but there's at least the attempt to harmonize and start from one starting point for the same product. So something like which would be developing in that direction would, of course, from the industry perspective, be welcomed. But again, we do understand that these systems, these tools like ABDs are set up in the respective national frameworks and are there to answer very concrete national questions. So a bottom line, I would say, whatever we can do to talk more about registry design, to try to bring something up which is not necessarily a European harmonized approach, but to identify certain data gaps maybe together, maybe that is going to be easier in the EU HTA system in the future, will be very much welcomed. I think we have to take into consideration that, and this is what I hear from some companies in the ABD system, that contracting with all those hospitals is not an easy thing to do from the legal and GDPR perspective. To convince hospitals to actually generate the data is not always easy, and it's not always in my hand as a company. If the physician at the end of the day is not willing to collect the data because he's going to have a full workload in the course of the week and the weekend as well, he might not be willing to fill out data sheets for these type of registries, and that's a bit put on the shoulders of the companies in the German ABD system, because if the physicians are not participating, they cannot prescribe. It's a very hard sanction which is set out in the law, or it's not driven by GBA necessarily. And then the other sanction in the German system is if you don't bring that data to the table, you have to go back to the negotiation table in the MNOC setting and appropriately lower the price, is the wording of the law there. So there are really clear sanctions. I wanted to highlight that. It's not always easy to set it up. I think both from the GBA perspective, as we've only seen 3 or 4 ABDs being initiated, it's a workload for both sides. But we should take into consideration that it's also quite burdensome for the companies to set it up. It seems to be a tool which is not fit for purpose for very small patient populations. If we're talking for about less than 100 patients in Germany, it's maybe not the right tool to be used. And this is also how I understand Antje Behring, a tool which is really striving for getting direct comparison data to the table, which is actually missing in some of those products. So in a way, my understanding or my reading of the system where it is used is definitely mainly in ATMPs, but in areas where you have other therapy options, other treatment options in the same label. So I would close there. So it's not a very negative view, but we have to really also see the first results, because we are still we're still looking at the outcome of the registry on Zolgensma and Risdiplam and so on. So remains to be seen if it's a successful tool, but it's certainly a very evidence-based, medicine-driven tool for good reasons in a way. I'd like to close with this one.
Thank you, Alexander. We will start with a question, but before to go there and reacting on what you say and what you answer, as well as the presentation done by Dr. Behring, who also in the lesson learned mentioned that actually real-world data collection and evidence collection can be more cumbersome and higher work than RCT to set in place RCT. So I come to one of the questions that was that we have in the audience. Do you see it, the real-world evidence and real-world data, as a facilitator or a barrier? I think there is a risk in both directions, and I would like to hear your point of view as well as Dr. Behring's point of view on that point. And perhaps it would be better to have more data, a more robust data at the time of the registration than the trends that we see over the last year. But that's part of the debate, I will say.
Is that a question to me, Diane, or you wish?
Yes, to you, to have the point of view of the industry on the one side, and also of Dr. Behring.
Yeah, I just be very brief and short here on this one. I think it's not a barrier, to be honest. We haven't made those experiences to call it a barrier. Again, I mentioned it's very strict sanctions, but we don't have the outcome. So we haven't seen companies leaving the market because they got an ABD request from GBA. I would be optimistic that we wouldn't see too many companies leaving after having an ABD. I rather see it as a tool to close data gaps. And this is a positive notion here, because at the end of the day, the alternative could be saying no to a medicine where there are data gaps. I mean, let's face it. Again, it's burdensome. It might lead to some products leaving the market. I don't see that. I see it more as a tool which can be used in certain circumstances where there are direct comparisons needed to bring data to the table, but I don't see any immediate impact on launching or not launching or keeping products in the market yet. Rather see it a bit positive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander, for this opinion. Yes. So what we think that that they will not leave the market immediately, but however, it comes evident in the end of the data collection. If this product is it worth to be kept on the market? So if there's no difference and there's no more value for patients, it could happen that then a company says we don't keep this product on the market. Could happen. However, but this is the aim in the end, to find the value of this product, to have the proper evidence generation, because we only request an ABD if there's uncertainty in the beginning.
Thank you very much. I'm looking to the question. Perhaps Karen had more time than me.
Yes. And thanks to the audience for contributing to the questions and for liking them. That makes our job much easier. And we can see that one of the key questions is one I actually had as well. Antje, you mentioned that in the development of the ABD, there is engagement with the National Regulator. There's a question from David Schricker about engagement with EMA, because as Alexandra has just said, we recognize there that there is a burden on the health technology developer, because every member state and health jurisdiction is often asking for their own form of data collection. So how are you looking at what EMA is asking in terms of data collection, given that particularly for the ATMPs, which have been your first subjects, there has been 10 or 15 years requirement of data collection? So does that feature in your discussion?
Definitely, but we have this challenge that at the time when we just start the discussion of an ABD, the product might not be licensed already. So then we can't interact with the EMA. But as soon as it is licensed, we can check, of course, what the EMA requested, what kind of data. So we wished we could have a closer exchange, but I think that the German law can't have a grip on the European agency to just force an interaction. So, however, I think that companies who have the feeling that they could come as a candidate asking for European advice, where we have also the EMA also on the table and can exchange earlier in this frame what kind of requests company could expect from the EMA side, but also from the HTA side. And after that, we can only start with a more detailed discussion. However, the requests from regulators are very important in our discussion, because sometimes we make the requests from the regulators to our own also, and we have additional requests to this. It's not that they're completely useless, except we can't amend these protocols. Therefore, we ask for the highest transparency between the different agencies, that we can learn from each other, or maybe also build on the experience of the others and work done in other advices.
Great, thank you. Would anybody else like to comment on the regulatory interaction? Martin, I can see you.
Yes, I'd just like to add that maybe it's easier for the companies just to continue the clinical trials after having licensed the drugs, because the Federal Joint Committee can also use these data, and it's much easier and it's not as expensive or laborious to build up an ABD. And this is often used in the assessment at the Federal Joint Committee. So as Antje Belgen said, the ABD is just an ultima ratio to collect data which can't be collected elsewhere.
And I'm just going to pop in with another related question to that, about how Germany could use other real-world data collected prospectively from other countries. And I'd be interested to take your views on that. Antje, I could see you nodding to that. So what are your views about using data from other countries?
Of course, we would like to use other data as soon as we can judge the quality of the registry of the databases that they come. So with the restriction of the permission to prescribe these medicines, we have somehow a view how many patients are in Germany, how many are in the database, and how many are lacking. So somehow we can estimate the uncertainties of this data collection. It makes it a little bit more difficult for other countries, but there is no exclusion. As you have seen, we ask even the Solgensma company to include other registries and to discuss the uncertainty to collect more data. And we have another example where we explicitly said, okay, there's a Spanish registry, please elaborate, dear company, elaborate on this register. We would like to take those data also.
Thank you, Antje. And Alexander, from a company perspective, presumably you're keen to share data across borders, or is that difficult when it's in these sort of more real-world evidence, less structured clinical trial protocol setting?
Yeah, I mean, it's not always easy to do so, because some data which is generated is maybe not accepted in another country because it's not generated in the way the methodology foresees it, or it's just not answering the question posed. So there is no one-stop shop in that respect. We would definitely want to call, and I think I made that very clear, for a format of discussion between the regulators and among different HTA stakeholders or agencies to align, and that's probably happening, and Antje knows much better those type of interactions than me, but that would be very much appreciated if we, as I said before, if we could align on questions. It's not, I totally understand it's not always possible, because you have to ask those questions in your setting, and it needs to be really closing those data gaps you see, and these data gaps might be different on the basis of different comparators, and you have different questions to pose to the company. But anything which helps to align, anything which helps to move towards, let's say, like an EBMT, CAR T cell, stem cell transplantation type of exercise would certainly help. But again, it's clear that this is not always the approach. The ABD approach is rather methodological. It's very much evidence-based, medicine-driven. And I'm not criticizing that. It's the way it is, but it's also burdensome for that reason. And I think we have to really also see the first outcome. So I would, before praising that system and taking it as a blueprint for anything we are doing at the European level, I think we would have to first see first outcomes. But it has a very an understandable approach for the German system that is to be made very clear.
Before I hand over to Diane for the next question, I'm just going to add a question in this to Bartold. So Bartold, you're working across the insurance organizations within Germany. Are you engaging with other such associations in other member states as you start seeing these sequences of treatments coming in, for example, for spinal muscular atrophy? We used to have a big unmet need. Now we have 3 or 4 treatments. Are you looking at how other countries are optimizing these treatments, looking at sequencing of use? Is that the kind of thing you're looking to use real world data for?
No, that is something truly spoken we did not do in the past. No? Although we trust only our own data, no? And because there we can exactly see what happens in the past, what is characterization of the patient, what is happening before, what is a treatment setting. So that is for us. We don't have another source where we have so much information together, né? And how we can assess and say exactly, okay, from our perspective, that is maybe a case we put out because it doesn't really fit to the SPC or to the label, né? And we only look at the people that are really treated, really in label, etc. So that is why we only more or less trust our own German data or health claim data. And we have around data for around 11 million clients, so that is around 15% in the German market. So yeah, that is normally not for all ultra orphans, but for a lot of indications, we have enough data to assess treatments.
Thank you. Over to Deanne for the next question.
Yeah, I want to ask a question to Antje again. Sorry about that. But within the European Commission, there are a range of legislative activities that impact health data collection, secondary use of health data and HTA. I want to know what is the impact in Germany, and I have specifically in mind the GDPR.
Yes, this is a really difficult question for me, because data storage and what kind of information is needed is always difficult. And we hope that the GDPR reasons are handled in the by the registry owners, of course, because the GBA only needs aggregated data and the results of that, if you think so. Of course, I think also the European data health space, I don't know what the order of the words, I'm sorry. I think it's also aiming for a general use of other data, and everyone has in mind the Scandinavian countries, how they use these kind of data and how they share and what kind of results they can conclude from this data collection. However, so I have no concrete answer to your question, I have to admit. But within our requests, we think that the GDPR question is something the company has to solve, and the registry owner, whom belongs the data and who are they stored and what kind of data can be withdrawn, and also withdraw the informed consent in the end. I'm sorry that it's not the answer of your question, but it's something very difficult for us.
But I agree, it's quite a difficult question, and the interpretation is not the same from country to country, and that's also one of the problems with regard to the GDPR, which create a barrier for real-world data collection, and it is a real problem. And I think there is a need for more clarification at the European level to be sure that the interpretation is the same in each single country, because otherwise we will always face that problem.
I completely support what you say, really, completely.
Diane, if I may add on this one, I would say that even if you need for this, you need to contract with German hospitals to get the data in the hands of the company, right? And even when you negotiate or talk with the data protection officers in the respective university hospitals in Germany, there are very different views of what data can be shared under which conditions, what is anonymized data, how wide is the consent of the patient, and so on. It's a tricky exercise for sure, and it can be an obstacle to generate the data. Just wanted to make that very concrete. It's very even different interpretations among different hospitals in Germany.
I fully agree, and I think it needs to be fixed if we want to go further with the data collection. Otherwise, we will always have face that problem.
Yeah.
I'm looking in the question.
I can perhaps pick up one following that, because I think that one of the areas where there's a difference is whether data collection is part of research or whether it's service evaluation. And that's a differentiator for how data can be used. And one of the questions in the chat is about whether the ABD is really a sort of real world evidence generation, or whether it's actually more classical research, because you're requiring a control arm, you've got a protocol, you've got a SAP. So Martin, we'll start with you. You've said that the patients are really involved in the research. What are your views on this? And then I'll turn to the other panelists.
Yes, I think we have to remember that the assessment and also the data collection in Germany is a very formal procedure, and there are strict requirements concerning the set of the data and the significance of the results, and there have to be comparative data and all that. And it's true, it's a kind of a research after the launch of the drug. And but on the other hand, we have to see that these data, they're just the basis for the negotiations for the pricing. And as we have already heard, there are also other data which may play a role in the negotiations. We don't know, because we as patients organizations, we are not, we don't share these negotiations. But I think that there are other real world data which may be important in these negotiations. So we have a mix of the very structured data which are discussed at the Federal Joint Committee and other data, and in the end we have the result of a certain price.
Thank you, Martin. Antje, your thoughts on this?
I like this question because it's really it's very interesting. So to turn real world data into real world evidence, we have to use proper methods, and it's a combination of what we formerly thought what real world data means. So we have to make a shift in the mindset. So applying evidence-based medicines methodology onto the assessment of these kinds of drugs. But these are collected after marketing authorization. This makes a big difference, I think, to enable the companies to collect these kind of data, because sometimes it's very difficult to recruit patients in clinical trials after the marketing authorization. So therefore, we find a platform to enable these kinds of data collection. So it's a classical research, I think, so therefore we sometimes think would be randomized controlled registry-based studies would be something new and something good to elaborate, but for these small patient populations it's sometimes very difficult to conduct these kinds of trials, I have to say. But however, so it's a combination, and it's going rather in the clinical research, classical clinical research, but with different kinds of data. I'm sorry, this is really a combination. I like this, but it has to be a different mindset, turning just the data collection into something valuable for decision makers.
And I think this reflects a shift we've seen in HTA payer understanding, perhaps in the last half decade, where we know that there were many publications led by our ZIN colleagues about how outcome-based managed entry agreements were unsuccessful in delivering the data required. So most member states are now becoming more purposeful in their data collection and stating that we need a protocol, we need an analysis plan, and we need that research question. So the research question may differ slightly because the health jurisdiction has slightly different data gaps and uncertainties given their own current pathway, but the greater clarity we can have around how we are designing these data collection processes means that we should be able to align a bit more, maybe, as we all look with interest at the Zolgensma additional data collection profile. I think there is potential for greater collaboration, and these are the kinds of things I think we need to keep talking about. Alexandra, I can see you nodding there. Is there anything you want to add to this discussion from the industry perspective?
I'd like to add the following at the following point, that what is not completely clear to me is if you have 3 companies having a product in the same indication and only 2 companies being part of the ABD. So, and also the whole infrastructure is not always very clear to me, because we're talking about disease-specific registries, I understand, in ABDs mainly, at least, this is my understanding, but it's not always clear to me how do you actually how do you deal with a situation where you have 2 companies or actually having a product in the same indication? Are they both then made subject to the ABD, or let's say you have 3, like in Zolgensma? I haven't found number 3 in that indication. So, Antje, maybe you can elaborate on this one. That's a bit. I think that's interesting from the industry perspective, and probably not all of our European audience, including me, would know how that would work.
Sure. As I said before, that is a high indication for an ABD if there is already a registry ongoing or there are ongoing data collections. However, if the evidence for this specific product is very good in the beginning, there is no need to request additional data collection. So we don't need it. But this product will be used in routine use. So if the doctors just record outcomes also for this product, then the comparison is already there. I don't know if we really request then a data collection. However, we would like to have it in the same data in the same database that it's recorded. But we can't. We would not request if the data is okay. Then we would not do this.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking is then the burden is put on the shoulders of the one coming second. In a way, you're not putting the ABD on the shoulders of the one coming first, usually, right?
Exactly. But the experience shows that one company copies the other one, so they all have also so a little bit the same weak, or let's say, evidence they show.
Okay, clear. Thank you.
Diane, over to you.
I'm just wondering whether we are talking about what happened in Germany, the difference between the country and so on, but certainly for orphan disease and orphan drug, I think there would be a real advantage of more international collaboration to collect these data, knowing that the population is very limited. So I think collaboration between countries is a need. It's not only an advantage, it's a need if we want to have data on time and in a relatively short time. Otherwise, it will always be a little bit and no harmonization amongst countries. And I think this is quite important, even for real world data. And there we should put in place a platform, international platform for that collection. I think that's important. And to some extent, not specifically for the real world data, but this is what some of the international initiatives are trying to do. I know well the Benelux are being part of it, but it's not the only one. When you see what the Nordic are doing and so on, this is one of the objectives. It's to collect data and to have access to more robust data and do joint assessment and so on. And I think as far as possible, we should do that at a European level. It looks very important for me. And it's a little bit sad that there is no more exchange through the country because of the difference at the national level.
Diane, may I just say something to that? I have the hope that it will change over the years, because the GBA is just starting with this ABD, and also we are learning what we will require and how we approach companies and registry owners also. And we learned now from one exchange that there are registry owners who are connected to other countries, and that makes us aware, so we should more interact with others. So I think this collaboration starts a little bit later if we are sure, so what kind of data we will collect also.
Yeah, I would also hope, and just to add to this, Diane, what you said, that there is more coming, because especially in ultra-rare diseases, it's an issue. We need to make sure that decision-making is much more pooled, and that includes real-world evidence generation. I think we've seen some of those ATMPs and ultra-rare disease indications leaving European markets again, or just being not very commercially successful. I'm not mentioning product names here, but it's a matter of fact that some ultra-rare disease ATMPs are really not really likely to stay for a long time in the market, even though some of them have quite high prices. But I think in that context, we have a lot of opportunities in the European health data space, in the general pharmaceutical legislation, projects like Darwin, which is led by the European Medicines Agency. So I think that all moves in the right direction. I think when we are discussing here today the ABD concept in Germany, it's quite ring-fenced by AMNOG, and I think we have to think a little bit outside of the box as well. What can be done, and what pieces can be learned from that ABD exercise, which we're currently doing, where we don't have all the outcomes yet on the table. I think one of those lessons learned would be, for me at least, we have to ask a clear question: what type of, what do we want to answer? Not to go on a fishing expedition. What do we have on the table as industry? And okay, we can convince you with a little bit of that piece of data, and then we convince some other countries with a little bit. So it needs to have a clear question. This is what I learned from the German system for good reasons, I think. I would also say, not to be negative, but I would also say that overburdening the system can also sometimes not solve all needs. This is not a criticism again, but maybe there is need for a different set of other tool or vehicle which we can use, which is a bit less constrained by methodology. Maybe that's not the only one which we will have in Germany or in Europe for the next 10 years to come. Because I must also say that for a small company with a very small team in Europe, this is not an easy exercise to do just for Germany alone. This is something which costs a lot of money, a lot of resources, and so on to meet those data requests. So yeah, I fully agree, Diane, with your point. We have to think a bit outside of the box, especially in areas of high unmet need and in areas where there is very small patient populations. We need to do more about this. There is this discussion about an EU fund for real-world evidence generation, which is not an easy exercise to do, but I fully agree, Diane, we need to do more in that space.
Thank you very much. I will just ask a last question to all the participants in this panel, asking them how we can improve the way the real-world evidence is generated to help resolve the uncertainty faced by the decision maker and optimize treatment use. I will perhaps start with Martin.
Yes, additional benefit means that you investigate the relation between a drug and a comparator. And this comparison is always specific. So you need a specific data set to investigate this relation. And therefore we need an infrastructure of registries on the one hand to have enough data sets to investigate this relation. And on the other side, procedures to change and to define these data sets, because we have to create a flexible system of data collection, and the registry, they always have a very strict and stable data collection, and this is a challenge for structured use of real-world data, which is based on registries.
Thank you. I will ask the same question to Bartold.
Yes, I agree, of course. And yeah, I guess that it's a take-home sentence I take from Antje. At the moment, it's easier to make an RCT as to start a registry. That is, of course, a hard judgment. And I guess it's important step is regarding improve the usage of our real-world data is to harmonize the register framework across Europe, so that the hurdles to start a register is much lower. And of course, I guess that is not the case in all registries in the EU at the moment, that we have, as we like to see, indication-based registries. And so, yeah, we have a higher chance to use these drugs, to use this data, sorry.
Thank you. Antje, what is your point of view?
Yes, I think the difficulties start only if we start collecting data when the drug is approved already. So if you could start earlier to have maybe a good historical control, even at the time after the marketing authorization, so the data collection started earlier for the natural history and so on. So start early, having a platform for specific diseases, then we don't have the burden to initiate only in a very short time frame later on this kind of data collection. So I think if we really start generating evidence early enough in everyone's mind, and not sometimes have the feeling we think I come through the authorization with this very small trial and I collect the data later on. This mindset maybe is really burdensome, then makes it difficult to generate the evidence. So thinking early and connecting earlier. So I don't know how we can make it more transparent. Some countries started here a data collection, and these are the core data we are asking for. So and we think, okay, if you're asking this, I have a small bits and pieces, and in addition, could we not collaborate in these kinds of things and make it more certain? I completely agree, Diane, that somehow I even don't know where to look at where these kind of data were already initiated a data collection. Yes. And I just read is the EMA are always asking a single-arm trials or single-arm data collection. Would that be sufficient also for the GBA? No, therefore we need an expanding this data collection for comparativeness.
Thank you. And we will finish by the point of view of the industry. So I have the same question to Alexander.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the answer to the last question was very important. I mean, very often you have different objectives by EMA and by HTA's payers. HTAs want comparative data, EMA want product-specific registries usually, because they only look at the product mainly. Yeah, I mean, if I were to look in the future, I think it would be helpful when we look at Germany that there is probably a bit more flexibility in the area of ultra rare and rare diseases in that space to bring data by other means. Although there is some flexibility in the German system for orphan drugs, as we all know. Yeah, I would think we have to wait for the first results of these ABDs, but it's an approach which, and I just recalling what Barthold said, RCT might be easier to set up than a registry that shows a little bit indeed that this is can be a burdensome exercise. But I think it's important really to also mention that so far it has not led to companies not coming to Europe. It has not led companies leaving European markets. I don't foresee that for the time being. It's probably not the tool in itself which would be relevant in that respect. So let's wait and see what the results will bring on the German system, whether we can take it as at least partly as a blueprint for other tools.
Thank you. We are very well on time, and so I will give the last word to Karen to wrap up our meeting. So Karen, the audience is for you.
Thank you very much to Diane, to Antje for our keynote and for the great discussion. I think that what we've heard here is common across other countries, that for these highly innovative technologies, we often have significant gaps in our understanding of added benefit, and in some cases they can be resolved by additional data collection if there are good clinical registries existing. And a lot of the questions have revolved around kind of how are we defining quality, and quality really depends on what our questions are. Can those questions be resolved by a particular registry? And is that data of sufficient quality? And that's something we've spent our whole year talking about within the real world evidence for decision, in terms of completeness, in terms of what the data were intended to be there for. If they weren't registries, they may be data coming from electronic health records. So these are all complex issues that we will all continue to discuss, but by greater transparency, as Antje has said there, in terms of clear protocols, clear analysis plans, we can improve the way in which we collaborate to provide good additional data. And as you'll see on the slides at the moment, one of the things we are doing within real world evidence for decisions is trying to understand what's happening in each health jurisdiction in terms of the way in which their data are developing, in terms of how clinical registries are being used, how administrative data is being used, how national registries like the cancer registry, which Antje mentioned at the beginning. And we've asked our HTA experts to complete a questionnaire which says, are these sources available? Are they of good quality? can you see a potential for using them in pricing and reimbursement decisions, even if they're not being used at the moment? So the ones available are on our website, and Antje is just finishing off helping us prepare the German one, and the Portuguese one will be coming soon as well. And so do visit the website to have a look at those documents to give a flavor for how the data spaces are developing. And we have really valued your engagement today as an audience. We've had some great questions from you. And so do sign up for our major symposium, which will be a review of our work over this year, where we've been looking at the pillars that can build real-world evidence, including data quality, governance and access, methodological issues. And there will be interactive discussions as we look to the future to see what policy and partnerships can be used to help us further in this discussion. So you can see a sign up. I think it'll be going in the chat. But if we were in the room now, I would be asking you to put your hands together for our great speakers and panelists for the really interesting discussion today. So thank you all from me for that great discussion. And we will close the webinar at this point. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
invitation.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.